Welcome in, Chatterbox Bengals. It's draft week, and we are joined by Andrew Winter and Ryan Alabama of Gridiron Grading. Thank you guys for hopping on with us tonight. One of my personal favorite draft accounts long before I got into this business, so very, very happy that I get the chance to talk to you guys about what the Bengals are going to do and what the rest of the league's looking at. So before we get into it and talk about pick 17 and all the other intricacies of the 2025 draft, first off, introduce yourselves. Tell everyone what Gridiron Grading is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be back, guys. Exciting times with a week or a few days, I guess now, right? It's sneaking up fast to go until the draft. Gridiron Grading, it's me and Ryan, two college friends. We played football together at a small Division III school in St. Louis. Found out there we were Bengals fans. Small community, and then from there, every year if you're a Bengals fan, the draft, specifically during those Andy Dalton years, was a time of hope. And so we wanted to just figure out, okay, what goes into some of these draft picks? Is there a way to project some of this stuff? So for the last 6 years, we've been using data to try to project what is a college player going to look like in the NFL. And we learn things every single year. So yeah, now we're in year 6. We specifically focus in on college production data. We think that makes us pretty unique. We found that there is a ridiculously strong correlation to what these players do in college and what that looks like in the NFL. And have adjusted. We've got our Google Sheet board we do every year. This year we introduced a web app that fans, anybody who finds it, can filter along specifically with what they're looking for. And yeah, just really big into prospect analysis, but Bengals fans on the side as well.
It's always good when you get someone this ingrained in the draft process that also happens to be a Bengals fan. That certainly is a positive for all of us. Obviously, we know the Bengals picking 17th this year, right smack in the middle of that first round. Not the year we wanted in the regular season. Obviously, with Joe Burrow playing quarterback, you're rooting for pick 32, but that wasn't the case this season. Sitting there in the middle of the first round, there's a lot of different strengths in this class, a lot of different positions thrown around. What are the biggest positions of need that the Bengals need to address early in this draft, most notably pick 17?
Yeah, I think the first ones that immediately come to mind are both sides of the ball in the trenches. I mean, interior pass rush and interior pass protection have been really hot topics throughout the entire Joe Burrow era for the Cincinnati Bengals. And that's for a good reason, because it always seems like Burrow is getting sacked. And on the flip side, it always seems like our defensive line really struggles to get pressure and bring opposing quarterbacks down. So I think when you break it down even a bit more granular, you're looking at specifically interior offensive line, so both guard spots on the left and right hand side. And then you're also looking at the interior of that defensive line, really a 3-tech type of body that can come in and just be a disruptive force from the middle of that defensive line and collapse that pocket a lot faster and generate some sacks that this team hasn't had for a number of years now.
And I'll add
Now, you
there
guys
as well, guys, linebacker and safety that are needs that maybe aren't talked about as much, but reading some of the stuff today, I could see potentially that being a sneaky first-round pick, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But definitely to Ryan's point, I would want to focus on those premium positions early.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jacob has talked a lot about this on Off the Bench in the mornings, but while this draft as a whole may lack some of the quote unquote superstar power that we've seen in some of the drafts before, this draft does feel fairly deep in terms of talent that could make an impact through a number of rounds. Can you touch on some of the positions that you guys view as the strongest and deepest in this draft, and then how that would affect your plan as the Bengals in 2025 as you make your draft picks?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think the middle rounds of this draft are the strong point. Specifically, that there isn't the high end talent, but we have more guys graded in that 60 to 100 range than we've had in any previous year. And the strengths of this draft are offensive tackles who are likely to convert to guard. So we see the offensive line talent is extremely strong in this class. The edge rusher class is also very strong. So that's another interesting one to keep in mind. I think some of the ones that we thought were strong going in that have kind of fallen off as we've gotten more data points. Interior defensive line is one that falls off pretty quickly. So if we're thinking about, say you're the Bengals or really any team who needs a pass rusher in the middle, like Ryan talked about, that needs to be a priority pretty early. And so if we're the Bengals, we put this out yesterday, Walter Nolen would be our top target. And the reason being is we don't see there being as strong of defensive tackles sitting there at 49, their second round pick, as we do potential guards. And that could be a tackle moving inside or a pure guard. I know Tate Ratledge is one of the few that played pure guard. That could make sense there. So that's how we would look at it. Again, if we were an NFL team, we wouldn't have ever put a team in a position to have to focus on need. But considering where they're at, that's how the strengths of this draft line up. And so that's what we would be looking to do is that defensive tackle round 1, let's come back for that lineman in round 2.
Bengals could potentially get bailed out by some of those deeper positions, like you said, at those tackles converting to guard. That's exactly the next question I was going to ask. How bound are the Bengals by operating the way they've operated before, going in with such pronounced needs? And how much does that negatively affect draft classes, not just for the Bengals, but overall when you're entering the first, second, and especially the later rounds, knowing what you have to draft instead of giving yourself the flexibility to take the best player on the board? We heard today that they are planning on going best player available at 17. I don't necessarily know if that's the best option for the Bengals given what they've done throughout free agency and how they've set up this roster. Certainly that's the way you should draft, but the Bengals haven't exactly set themselves up to do so. How much of a negative is that?
Yeah, I mean, roster management starting in the free agency period really plays a crucial role in how aggressive and how exciting a team can go into the draft and really attack that best player available, or potentially, like the Eagles last year, double dip at a position in the first 2 rounds because they have the luxury to do so. And one thing that's been really frustrating for Andrew and myself is that with the free agent moves the Bengals made this offseason, it feels like the team is paying more for what is arguably 95% of the same roster it had last year. And granted, there are always a couple things that can change, but like you mentioned early on in the show, Jacob, they ended up in a result that no fan wanted to see, and I'm sure the team as well was also incredibly disappointed. So when you come into the draft period having 3 below average players competing for guard spots and having 4 interior defensive linemen that both in college and in the NFL haven't really shown any pass rushing prowess, you're kind of locked in. And it brings me back to the Billy Price draft and a couple other years after that, to where the team kind of telegraphs the positions of need and the players that they like, to where whether it's right before them or a team trading up from behind them, it always seems like they're ending up picking someone that might be the second or the third best available at a position group. And even then someone that might be, let's say, 4th, 5th, or 6th on their big board at the time the pick rolls around. So the two really go hand in hand. And it's our dream that any NFL team sort of treats the draft as an opportunity to add just talent that you can have under contractual control for 4 or 5 years. And it's unfortunate that the Bengals have that and need to sort of marry that with so many needs that they have on the team.
Yeah, I'd build on that. I think, sorry that cut you off there, Craig. Just like one comment on
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Last year. When those needs line up, it's great. We've seen it with, say, an Amarius Mims pick. If you need a tackle
Absolutely.
and a good tackle falls, that's great. They're likely to do that. I think that their board does stack up well when they do that. I wouldn't put that past them. I think the issues arise when something unexpected happens, like you lose Frank Ragnow. Okay, now we're pressured to rush. We've already slotted this for a center. Okay, now we have to pick that next center on our board. That's where those problems can come in. And, just really hoping we don't see that happen with defensive tackle this year. Because I could see Walter Nolen falling off before 17. Then who knows what happens.
He is the only interior pass rusher that you have graded up near that 17 mark, correct?
Yeah, Derrick Harmon could be a reasonable pick there. But if you lose both, I think, I really don't know where that pick could go. Hopefully not the next defensive tackle on their board.
Well, we saw last year the Bengals willing to take a risk on a player with some character concerns in Jermaine Burton. This year, especially at 17, there are a number of names who are reportedly in play that maybe, if it weren't for these character concerns, might be top 10 picks. You mentioned Walter Nolen. There's also James Pearce Jr. and Mike Green, all 3 of which on the defensive line who have shown the talent and the ability to be one of the top players in this year's draft, but character concerns have kind of seemingly had them slide down the board. Which of those players, given the fact that Todd McShay reported today that the Bengals are willing to look past those character issues, do you think is most worth the risk, and how much of those concerns should it affect where those players are drafted in your eyes?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Unless you want to go, Ryan.
Yeah, go for it, Andrew. No, go for it.
I was just going to say on the character concerns, I do wonder what there is to that. I think there's some of those that would be less problematic if you take a James Pearce, where those character concerns are more related to being introverted, potentially a little bit quieter in the locker room, as opposed to when you get those character risks like Burton, those were criminal concerns. And obviously we're not the ones doing the interviews, but that becomes, I think, a little bit more worrisome. I think the concerns with a guy like Nolen, a guy like Pearce, I'd be more willing to make those bets than I would some of that criminal stuff. So I think for us, Mike Green, we see as a top 15 talent, but even knowing what we know, that's probably not a risk we're willing to take considering what the Bengals need, which is a higher floor player, to be honest, in this year's draft. Even James Pearce, who we love, I could still see that being a little bit too risky for them at 17.
That's exactly what I was going to ask off those players. Do teams remove these character concerned players completely off their board despite the testing at the combine, like James Pearce running out of the gym and 3 years of production for some of these guys? Are they removed from some teams' boards, maybe even including the Bengals?
Yeah, I think you've got to imagine that there's some threshold for all of these character and off the field concerns that each team feels comfortable with. And like Andrew mentioned before, there's obviously quite the difference between someone who might be a little bit lazier or more introverted versus someone who has done criminal conduct and could be facing charges. So there's always a spectrum, and especially when you get to that criminal side, we don't condone any of these actions, but I think one thing about the NFL is that it's a talent business, and even though in hindsight the Jermaine Burton pick isn't something that I think the team would be comfortable with, we tweeted out very early on in that 2024 season to where while the outcome wasn't what we expected, the process of being willing to take a risk in the third or the fourth round on a player that might have first round talent is something that we appreciate, and we understand the aggressiveness. Again, we're not in the room, so we don't understand the full extent of those more difficult character concerns to deal with. But it's something to where if it causes a Mike Green, for example, to fall into the end of the first round or the second round, I'm sure there are 32 teams that, as long as there's not round one draft capital attached to it, they'll all be chomping at the bit to take him, and they'll sort of let those legal processes play out. So, like you said, I'm sure there are teams that probably shy away, but we understand the NFL is a talent business, and at a certain point, I think that some of these players would be too hard to pass up on, despite what we might think about their personal lives.
All three of those players have been pretty heavily linked to the Bengals all throughout this draft process. Outside of those three names, when it comes to rushing the passer, who else do you think is near the top of the Bengals board or very likely to be there at 17 that would make a good pick that maybe hasn't been talked about quite as much?
I think, Jacob, the ones that we've been excited about on Twitter and that fans are excited about are the ones that can rush the passer effectively. So those guys like Mike Green, James Pearce, Walter Nolen, Derrick Harmon. The names that aren't being talked about enough, I think, are the worrisome names. And I think that's because we know it, fans know it, we don't even want to put it out into the universe. So you think of a guy like Mykel Williams at Georgia. A lot of athletic talent there, the size is there, the SEC pedigree is there, but it reminds us a lot of that Myles Murphy pick where you're taking a huge bet on that production not being there in college and showing up in the NFL. That doesn't happen a lot. Shamar Stewart's another one. He's a guy we'd be more willing to take a bet on there just because of the historic athleticism. And if you're going to bet on a guy like that with no production, at least bet on some kind of super elite trait. Right. So that's another option. I think Tyler Booker's one, and it's been kind of moving around the last few days that we could see happen. We think that'd be a disaster in round one. So I think those are names that aren't being talked about that could show up there. Maybe you think about more exciting names. I think Nick Emanwari from South Carolina could be a potential option there. Super versatile, I think offers you a lot of what Jihad Campbell could do, but he's going to be able to play in week one next year. And that's, if I were approaching this as Duke Tobin, you want a guy who's there week one because losing 3 games again at the beginning of a season can't be an option. So I think those are kind of the 8 to 9 names that we see as potentially happening. I don't expect one that just comes from completely out of left field.
You mentioned Tyler Booker
And
as a potential nightmare first-round pick. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the only other name that's quieted down a little bit is Michigan's Kenneth Grant. I think consistent with what Andrew and I have spoken about here and all over Twitter too is that Kenneth's a completely fine player. He just doesn't offer any upside in that pass rushing game.
Right.
And so, especially with the signing of Slayton and the other bigger bodies that the team already has on the roster, again, that's a pick that in round one, the team just doesn't have the luxury to take another nose tackle. So, thankfully, that commentary's cooled off a little bit, but it's still one that we see get thrown around a little bit. But yeah, didn't mean to cut you off.
No. All good. You guys are the guests. We want to hear your opinions. They hear plenty of me. But Andrew, you mentioned that Tyler Booker would be a nightmare pick in round one. This is a player that it seemed like a lot of Bengals fans and analysts alike were very, very excited about being a potential first-round talent. And then he put on the T-shirt and shorts and went out and ran on the field. And everyone kind of cooled off on Tyler Booker. I've seen a lot of people saying, a lot of production, not testing well. How do you range those two together? I want to give you guys kind of a chance to explain why that RAS score, that athletic testing, is so important in terms of projecting these guys, specifically Tyler Booker, who was linked to the Bengals at 17 pretty heavily in the beginning of this process, mocked to them twice today, including a mock draft by Chris Sims. I see you guys have him ranked as your 200th player. Not exactly something I want at pick 17.
Yeah, he's one of these players where, so we value film as part of our ranking. It's about a third of it. We take consensus boards and film analysts that we respect. We don't watch all these players. It's not a full-time job. I want to just reiterate that we're grading 700 plus, and we've seen that just taking these scouts, take a Lance Zierlein, Dane Brugler, they're doing the job. We can just take the wisdom of crowds, put that as part of our analysis. Where Tyler Booker falls off, actually the production metrics. So we use a lot of PFF data, and I think PFF gets a lot of flack, but we have found that it's one of the most predictive metrics, offensive linemen, PFF charting, and grading data. They do a good job. And so Tyler Booker didn't grade well as a run blocker at all, which we see out there that people calling him a good run blocker. He did grade it really poorly there, and I think that checked out with the athleticism. So when you see those things add up, that's worrisome. As a pass blocker, he was fine, about average, but if you're taking a guard round one, you want an elite profile there. And then you mentioned the athleticism. Interior offensive line is the position where athleticism is the most important. So taking a bet on a guy who's a 50th percentile athlete, he got a little bit of a bump in our process. We value measurements, so take a thing like hand size. I think sounds funny, but Tyler Booker is a massive dude, and that even bumped him up a little bit. But even then, the short shuttle, the agilities, you need that as a guard. So I think there's a high floor with him despite being 200 on our board. You might get a guy like Osiris Torrance, who's been a league average guard for the Bills, but you don't take that round one. And I think with Booker, that's what you're seeing is there wasn't really a floor of production that we saw on his PFF profile. The athleticism indicates that he's never going to become an all-pro level guard. You cannot take that round one at a position, especially this deep in this draft. I just think that would be a disaster of value and not taking an elite guard prospect in round one. I just don't think you can do that.
Are the best guard prospects in this draft tackle converts?
Yeah, I think so. And we do have a fair number of true interior offensive linemen within our top 25, our top 50. But when you get to 17 for the Bengals, I think a name that stood out to Andrew and myself is Kelvin Banks Jr., the offensive tackle out of Texas. And he's someone that, with the athleticism that someone like a Tyler Booker doesn't have necessarily, we'd feel comfortable kicking him inside from that tackle position to guard and seeing him succeed to, let's say, the level of a Dalton Risner, for example. That's a comparison as far as a floor is concerned that Andrew and I put out recently. But even as you get into that second round or later into the draft as well, there are a couple of names like a Jonah Savanea or a Wyatt Milam where you're comfortable because of the athleticism and because of the pass blocking ability they've shown in their college careers that you can kick them inside. So if it's not necessarily a Tate Ratledge, for example, those are some of the names that we'd be super excited about as far as tackle to guard converts. And like Andrew mentioned earlier, that's really where sort of the cream of the crop for this offensive line class comes from. It's those guys that you think can kick inside, and then maybe in 2 or 3 years down the line, they move back out to tackle, but at least you have that sort of athletic baseline to feel comfortable that that's where they can at least start their career.
I do want to ask you guys about a comment that Duke Tobin made today during his press conference, specifically on this conversation, traits versus production. So he made the comment today, quote, "You've got to have physical traits to play in this league. There are plenty of examples of guys who have not had great collegiate production, but have had stupendous NFL athletic traits who have come into our league and really shined." Based on your guys' evaluations, and I know not only do you do the current draft pack class, but you guys evaluate previous draft classes and how they've stacked up based on some of your recent work. How does that statement of traits being so important stack up against what you guys do in your daily work with gridiron grading?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the fun part about this process. You have those two variables. Which is more important? Are they both important? Slightly disagree with that comment. I think you need to start with production and then move to athleticism. But to his point, there is a baseline level of athletic ability that is necessary in the NFL. Usually it's a 70th to 75th percentile athlete, but there's tons of those in every class. The issue is when you're not taking those productive players, we found that production has a stronger correlation to NFL success than athleticism, but those elite players, they have both. And I would be curious to know what kind of goes into the production process when they look at it, because we do individual production scores for every position. And we have found that is by far has a stronger correlation, I should say, than just taking a guy who's athletic. You see it sometimes, a guy like Trayvon Walker, who had no production in college, but it took him 3 years to figure it out. I think Ryan and I, we were talking about Yaya Diaby, who's a Bucs edge rusher, another guy, super athletic, that was able to figure it out. But you see that more often with production guys who aren't athletic than you do with just athletic freaks that come into the league. I think Jelani Woods is one that stands out to me as you think about, let's say, a tight end, 100th percentile athlete, but the production wasn't there. And so we would always start with production. All right, then let's match that up with the guys who went and showed it with testing. And then that's where we start our process.
You mentioned for surprise first-round positions for the Bengals, Andrew, a little bit ago, potentially safety, and you dropped the name Nick Emmanwori, the safety from South Carolina. The other safety that's been talked about in the first round, Malachi Starks. Is there a reason you said Emmanwori and not Starks? Is there a strong preference there between the two?
Yeah, I think if you take a quick look at our board, you'll see Emmanwori's in the top 20, but Starks is hovering somewhere with an early day 3 grade, and we think that people are incredibly high on him because of his intangibles. He went to the University of Georgia, a big SEC program. He's a national champion, a team captain. From everything we've heard, he interviews well and he has great character. But the two things that seem to be really missing from his profile are that athleticism and then anything above that sort of average to slightly above average level of production. So when you combine all of those together, it's just not a pick that we would necessarily feel comfortable with at 17 or even 49. And that's no shade on who he is as a person, but there are plenty of other safeties that we think could fill a similar role that we'd be a lot more excited about, and Nick Emmanwori is one of those. So that's definitely a name that would get us a lot more interested at pick 17 if the team were to go in the direction of a safety.
The other name that won't be ready for week 1, as you said, Jihad Campbell, potentially talked about for the Bengals, a player that I personally like a whole lot as an Alabama grad. He was a whole lot of fun to watch for the last 3 years, but the injury obviously knocked him down many boards. Would he be more squarely in this conversation for 17, maybe near the top of your guys' asks if it wasn't for that injury? I see him ranked very highly on your board.
Yeah, we had him, Jacob, in our first mock we did a few months ago as our pick there. We love him as a player. To be graded in the top 15 for us as a linebacker requires a ridiculous prospect profile. So we love him as a player. We think he's going to be a star. The issue, to your point, is just they need a guy who can come in and produce right away, and you can't miss somebody for 4 weeks. And specifically when you think about positional value, needing a guard, needing pass rush, those to us are premium positions. Linebacker falls a little bit lower. And just they don't have the flexibility that, say, the Lions did a few years ago to go pick a Jahmyr Gibbs, pick a Jack Campbell, pick a Sam Laporta in the top 40, where you're just building out the sides of your roster with a linebacker or a running back. They need the really important positions. They need to do it early. And so that's why Jihad Campbell wouldn't be a prime target for us. I think the talent still is going to be one of the better players on the board. I just don't think the fit makes as much sense for them.
I see your second off-ball linebacker listed as Carson Schlesinger from UCLA. Very athletic player, very fun player for sure, but there doesn't seem to be much of a consensus whatsoever after Campbell in terms of that second off-ball linebacker. We know that's a need for the Bengals, or at least we think it is, with Oren Burks signed in the offseason and Jermaine Pratt seemingly on his way out, though some questions can be asked after the press conference today. Where do you think the best place to attack that linebacker need is? If it's not Campbell at 17, Schlesinger, according to your board, wouldn't be there at 49. Do you think that would be a good pick there or later in the draft?
Yeah, we love Schlesinger. He was actually our second-round pick in our most recent mock, and I think we're in agreement with the two of you where linebacker is a sneaky need for this team. Obviously, Logan Wilson is cemented in his position, but I think according to what Duke Tobin said recently, it still seemed like Pratt's role is up in the air. And then Oren Burks is a fine player. Muma Jongmeta is a fine player. But there's still plenty of space to round out that room. And I think Andrew agrees with me where starting in that third round all the way to the fifth round is where you really start to hit that sweet spot for linebacker production and athleticism. And there's a handful of guys that we've highlighted in the past that if it happens to be in that fourth round, let's say, we'd be thrilled about. So you have Cal's Teddy Buchanan, who is an incredible athlete and produced really well at Cal. The only thing that's really dragging his profile down for us is that film grade, and we sort of attribute that to the consensus community not valuing linebacker as highly, but also perhaps there are just people that haven't gotten around to evaluating him just yet. Jack Kaiser is someone that's really strong for us, and especially with Al Golden returning to the Bengals for what is now his first stint as defensive coordinator, that's a pick that we would, again, be excited about and could absolutely see. And then Andrew might not co-sign this one as much as I do, but I love my MAC players, and I think Sean Dolak is one of the best linebackers in the class, incredibly strong athlete. I think he has the highest or one of the highest production scores for linebackers for us in this class. And that's someone that I personally would be thrilled with at the position. So plenty of names in that third to fifth round area where if the team wants to target linebacker, that's where the value is going to match up with the need.
Yeah, no hard disagreements there. I think, you have two guys that could go top 50. After that, I mean, you're kind of handpicking from there. I probably wouldn't even go as early as 81. If they don't go Campbell or Schlesinger, I probably wouldn't touch linebacker until round 4 at the earliest.
You guys talked at the beginning about interior offensive linemen and the need for adding potentially multiple bodies at that position in this year's draft. One name that has drawn interest, of course, has been Tate Ratledge. Now, this is a guy that multiple mock drafts over the last couple of days have him going to the Bengals, but not until pick 81. Conversely, you guys have him as the number 20 overall player on your big board. Why will he fall to 81 if he's, that good? And then where in your eyes does it make sense for the Bengals to take Tate Ratledge?
Yeah, we love Tate Ratledge, specifically for the pass protection. When we were talking a few weeks ago, Craig, we didn't think Ratledge would even be there at 49. Especially after his elite athletic testing, particularly, we look for agilities, and his agilities were incredibly quick. So that translates well. He hasn't picked up steam, though, later into the process. He's sitting right where he was kind of going into athletic testing, which is in that late second to early third range specifically. Why would he fall if that happens? He's a little older. He's 24 years old. Issues. I think there is some worries about his run blocking. But as you think about fits for a team that throws the ball a ton in true pass sets, that's where we get excited about Ratledge, and that's why he grades well. We weight that a little bit higher. So to have that combined production, combined athleticism, we don't see very many examples of guards who fail when they do that well in both aspects. So that's why we get excited. But I think, again, to that point, it's age, it's injuries in the past, it's potentially him not becoming a great run blocker. And then, yeah, just that overall profile, I think, doesn't excite people as much to have that overall well-rounded, like Tyler Booker size to stand out on.
Absolutely. The other Georgia interior lineman, one the Bengals have met with multiple times, I noticed ranked much higher on your board, Jared Wilson, and he's going right there where Ratledge is, if not even later. Something important to note about Wilson, almost exclusively a center since 2022 at Georgia. How confident are you in his, number one, his ability to move off of center and play the guard position, and number two, just overall NFL success for a guy that I don't think many people even know the name?
I wouldn't move him. I would leave him at center. But I'll let you take that one, Ryan. I wouldn't move him. That's my strong aspect on that right off the bat.
No, I was going to say, I think looking at his career data, he's played less than 100 snaps at either guard spot. And that's someone to where, similar to Matt Lee previously, when you have someone who is an elite center and they've played there for the majority of their career, it's what they do well. It's such a unique position to where moving them to either side of that ball can be a little bit trickier. And one thing I'll say too is, despite the fact that we're big proponents of moving some of the tackles into guard for this particular class, it's not something we're overly keen on at large. We understand that guard is a substantially different position than tackle, center is substantially different than guard, and so on. And of course, Jared Wilson, like we mentioned before with some of those other tackles, has the athleticism that brings you a lot of comfort to where if you want to move him, you think that there's a baseline that allows you to do so. But when someone's so good at a position they've played for so long, like Andrew said, keep him at center. He'll have a very long and a very good career. And while it might not necessarily be in Cincinnati, there's going to be another of the 31 teams that are going to be super happy with how he performs for them.
Absolutely.
Obviously, the focus largely for the Bengals has been on the interior offensive line and then defensive positions. But I think there's a consensus agreement amongst Bengals fans and many experts that there is still needs on this offensive side of the ball. And specifically, there's an expectation that the Bengals take a running back and potentially even a tight end. Two obvious names stand out at those positions in Harold Fannin and Cam Scatabo. Both are projected to be kind of that mid-round available player. Give us a breakdown on those two guys and then maybe other names that we should watch out for from the running back and tight end position that maybe fit the Bengals and what they try to do offensively.
For sure. I think the sweet spot for this is going to be in that round 3 to 5 range, like linebacker. Harold Fannin, yeah, don't even get us started on that one, Craig. He's been one of our favorite players in this draft for the last year. All-time historically productive season, not only at tight end, but compared to every position we evaluate in the last 10 years. And he did it at ages 18 to 20, not playing tight end until he even got to college. Ridiculously impressive. Did it versus some of the best schools in the country too, Penn State and Texas A&M last year. In terms of how he fits for the Bengals, I don't see that happening. The Bengals have not historically picked guys from small schools in the top 2 rounds, and Fannin is not going to be there in late round 3. So super excited for him. I think he makes plenty of sense for a team like the Eagles, even the Chiefs, potentially the 49ers. I think those are all 3 teams to watch. So love him as a player. Don't expect him to be a Bengal, even though that would be awesome. And then if you get to a guy like Cam Scatabo that you mentioned, yeah, love Scatabo. I think he makes more sense probably in that round 3 to 4 range. We had him right behind Ashton Genty in terms of college production. I think he's getting knocked a little bit for his stature. He came from Sacramento State as a smaller school guy, but he showed it on the biggest stage, incredibly productive. He tested it in a fine range. We like Kareem Hunt as a comp for him, and I think we're all familiar with the Kareem Hunt that has played for the Chiefs the last few years, but people forget he was the Rookie of the Year coming out. We think Scatabo could be a player like that right away if he's given a role. Would love him on the Bengals, and they did meet with him. I think that would make sense. I think if you think about tight ends that might make sense for the Bengals, I could see a guy like Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon. He's one of the few tight ends in this class that we think has a well-rounded tight end 1 future profile. So he could make sense at 81 if he makes it there. And then running backs, it's such a deep class. You could probably name 10 to 15 guys there that would be exciting. DJ Giddens from Kansas State is one of our favorites. I think profiles like a more athletic David Montgomery. Would love him as a guy in round 3 or round 4. But again, this is a historic running back class, compares to that Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook class from a number of years ago. And so I think wouldn't come out of this class without taking one. I think they'd come away with 2 really good ones by picking in round 4, round 5, and then undrafted free agent. But I don't know, Ryan, if you have other names to add to that list.
Yeah, the only other ones that stand out immediately to me, when you're thinking about tight end, Jalen Conyers out of Texas Tech is someone that we've highlighted before. Great athlete, solid enough production profile, sort of inches closer to that tight end 1.5 role, I would say, to where he's maybe not going to be a premium tight end in the league, but offers really good upside in the receiving game and also has some blocking prowess. And then the only other running back I would mention would be Basil Tootin out of Virginia Tech. And that's one who gets knocked a lot for ball security issues, but that's something that thankfully you can teach as you get to the NFL and throughout the rest of his career. And he's truly someone like Giddens that is lightning in a bottle. Incredibly strong athlete, good college production at Virginia Tech. So that's another in a very similar range to Giddens, to where if that's what you want to double dip with, like Andrew mentioned, or if it's an either or situation, both of those names are guys that we would definitely be super keen on. And I think the team should keep an eye on in those mid rounds.
The Bengals met with 3 of the consensus top backs, both Ohio State backs, Trey Hendrickson and Quinshon Judkins, as well as the Iowa running back, Cincinnati native Caleb Johnson. Do you think in such a deep class it would be a mistake to use that second-round pick with so many other team needs on a running back? Maybe that's jumping to too many assumptions, but I figure all 3 will comfortably be gone by pick 81.
For this specific team, I think it would be. For a lot of NFL teams that are more set at some of these premium positions, I think it makes all the sense in the world to take a guy like TreVeyon Henderson if he's there in round 2. You're looking at a guy, and we saw it with the Eagles last year in Saquon Barkley. If you put these star running backs in good situations, it can change your offense. But for the Bengals, I would be, as a fan personally, pretty disappointed if there was a running back at 49. I think that would just be tough, I think, to swallow unless they're able to get, a few more picks there. So I would be against it. I think all-time talented class. I expect a lot to go. I think Henderson goes around 1 just because I think he's that good, and I think other teams will see that too. But for the Bengals, I think the depth here should make them wait until day 3.
Speaking of some betting lines there, drop that TreVeyon Henderson might go round 1. That seems like a lock for 3 running backs then, because there's no way a Marion Hampton's falling out. I know the Bengals won't be interested, but I have to ask, this quarterback class, it's had a lot of controversy brought up about it. How many do you think go in round 1, and how many do you think are worthy of a round 1 selection, even with that quarterback bump? I'm not asking for round 1 grades. I know there's probably not too many of them, but how many of these guys do you think are even worthy of round 1 consideration?
Yeah, Andrew might disagree with me, but I personally think there are 4 quarterbacks that, given the emphasis the league puts on that position, and I'll put in air quotes, are worthy of being first-round picks. And those 4 quarterbacks are going to be Cam Ward out of Miami, Florida, Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado, Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss, and then Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. I think with some of the more chalky names, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, we see what they did as passers the previous seasons on the football field. We're all relatively confident, given what the media has been saying, that Cam Ward is all but a lock to go number 1, and then Shedeur Sanders at a minimum has a floor of 21, let's say, with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But our number 1 quarterback is actually Jackson Dart, just because of his production on the field. And I know a lot of people in the media aren't the biggest fans of the Lane Kiffin offense at Ole Miss, but one thing Jackson Dart consistently did in his years at the school was produce on the football field. And then lastly, Jalen Milroe has been somebody that Andrew in particular has been a really strong fan of. And I think between the athleticism and the arm strength, he's one of those quarterbacks where if you can scheme an offense for him, you feel really strong about his ability to succeed. And while it's not necessarily the traditional way that quarterbacks have found success in the NFL, it's someone that, like we spoke earlier in the show, maybe has the traits that you'd be willing to bet on at the end of the first round or even at the start of the second round when, again, you can escape that first round pick label.
I wasn't 100% sure you were going to say Milroe. I had a good guess, and that's really what I wanted to hear. I'm the biggest Milroe fan you'll ever meet.
If I were making the pick, so our process factors in the floor too, and I agree with Ryan. I think there's 4 guys worthy. The other 3 I see as just high floor. They might become the 15th to 20th best QB in the league, but you need a top-level QB, and I think Milroe's the one guy who has that. So if I were to make a Josh Allen type bet in this class, if I were a team, that's who I'd be waiting on. I'd hopefully let him sit a year, and I'd take a bet on Jalen Milroe.
As long as it's not Pittsburgh or Cleveland, I am all in on the Jalen Milroe NFL experience. Craig, I know you had one more before we let these boys get out of here.
Yeah, we got one more question for you, and then we'll let you go. And the question is, again, with this deep draft class that we all know exists, give us some names that you would be ecstatic to hear the Bengals call on day 3 that maybe people aren't necessarily aware of, or maybe they are, but just should be overtly aware of them as a option for the Bengals.
These will be the best clips if the Bengals take them, so just make sure you get it right here.
I can start because I have one I'm super excited about that I think could be a real fit, and that's Logan Brown. He's a offensive tackle from Kansas, former 5-star recruit, started his career at Wisconsin. He was top 10 in the country going there. Didn't play a ton. Then he transferred to Kansas and had, in his 1 year of production, an all-time great productive year at Kansas. He didn't allow a sack in any true pass set. He was a really good run blocker. Then he went and tested like a freak. And he looked a lot like Amarius Mims in terms of his production profile. Now he's 3 years older because he had those years where he wasn't playing at Wisconsin. But he's going to be sitting there in day 3. I think he's a guy that could move into guard, and I think he would fit really well. He had elite short shuttles, which matters a ton for interior offensive linemen. He's freakishly strong. I'm pretty sure he was one of the national leaders in high school for shot put throwing, which does translate for offensive linemen. And so he's a guy I would just be incredibly excited about. Again, he's going to be knocked for that 1 year of production coming from Kansas that doesn't historically produce offensive linemen. And then, again, being a little bit older. But if you can get a guy like that in day 3, that's a phenomenal value. And we would be ecstatic. I'm sure there are a lot of people who wouldn't know who he was, but we would be pumped up for Logan Brown.
Yeah, and then I'll throw out another name too. One guy that we're incredibly high on is Central Arkansas's edge rusher David Walker. He profiles with one of the best pure pass rushing profiles we have seen in the 6 years that we've been grading prospects. His pass rush production is absolutely off the charts. Andrew can fill in the correct numbers if he has them off the top of his head, but his pass rush win rate too, specifically in those true pass sets, was something that was really eye-popping. I think it was north of 20, if not north of 25, and I don't want to put Andrew on this. Yeah, north of 30 even. So it's someone that we think profiles very similar to a Brandon Graham or a Carl Lawson, perhaps a bit on the smaller side traditionally, but he's someone that even at the Senior Bowl too absolutely wreaked havoc on offensive linemen. So as early as the 3rd round, let's say, if he's the pick at 81, we'd be absolutely thrilled to have him on any roster, but especially the Bengals roster.
Of course. Well, we love it. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Andrew Winter, Ryan Albaum of Gridiron Grading. Go ahead, make sure you check out their draft board over on Twitter. They got a great new web app that you can filter everything out. Super easy to use. I know I'll have it rocking and rolling during our first round live stream here on Chatterbox Bengals, making sure we're getting the right players with good grades, according to you guys. That's all that matters, right? So thank you guys so much for the time. We really, really appreciate it. And Houday, Craig and I, we'll see you guys again Thursday.
See ya, fellas.